Most people don't realize they are living as public property. Their choices are edited by approval, their silence controlled by fear of judgment. The moment you live for others, you surrender leverage. And leverage, once lost, is rarely returned. What follows is not motivation, it is recalibration. By the end, your reactions will slow, your exposure will shrink, and your presence will feel heavier. You will see where power leaks and how to seal it, quietly, permanently. Machiavelli understood a truth most people never consciously confront. The moment your sense of self depends on approval, you become strategically compromised. Most people believe they are making independent choices, yet their decisions are quietly filtered through how they will be perceived, judged, or accepted. This dependency does not announce itself as weakness. It disguises itself as politeness, morality, or social harmony. In reality, it is a surrender of leverage. When external validation becomes the reference point, internal authority dissolves. A person who seeks approval must constantly scan the environment. They adjust tone, suppress instinct, delay action, and soften conviction not because it is wise, but because rejection feels dangerous. This creates predictability. Predictable people are easy to manage. Their boundaries are flexible, their reactions rehearsed, and their values negotiable under pressure. Machiavelli observed that once someone can anticipate your need to be liked, they can influence your behavior without resistance. Control does not require force when compliance is volunteered. Living for others slowly trains you to outsource judgment. You begin to measure decisions not by effectiveness or alignment, but by how smoothly they will be received. Over time, this erodes clarity. You hesitate more, justify more, and move less decisively. Power leaks through explanation. Each time you seek consensus for a personal decision, you dilute authority. The unaware mistake this for humility. In reality, it is exposure. Those who live for themselves operate from a different axis. They decide first, internally, based on long-term positioning rather than short-term comfort. Approval becomes irrelevant data, not a command. This does not make them reckless or hostile, it makes them anchored. Their actions feel deliberate because they are not fragmented by external noise. When resistance appears, it does not destabilize them, it confirms independence. Machiavelli's insight was not about selfishness, it was about sovereignty. A sovereign mind cannot be governed by the emotional economy of the crowd. It understands that most social pressure exists to maintain existing power structures. When you stop feeding those structures with your compliance, you regain leverage. You become harder to steer, harder to predict, and harder to replace. This is where real control begins, not through dominance over others, but through withdrawal of access to your inner direction. Living for yourself is often misunderstood as defiance, but Machiavellian awareness reveals something quieter and far more effective. True self-direction is not loud, emotional, or performative. It is internal authority decisions made privately, without the need for validation or applause. Most people announce their intentions before they are ready, hoping agreement will protect them from doubt. In doing so, they expose their trajectory and invite interference. Power, however, moves without announcement. Those who require permission confuse communication with security. They explain their plans, justify their motives, and preemptively soften their stance to avoid friction. This habit creates dependency. Once others are accustomed to being consulted, they expect influence. Over time, the individual loses control over timing and direction. Machiavelli understood that influence grows in the space where intentions remain concealed. What is unseen cannot be obstructed. Internal authority reverses this pattern. The self-directed individual decides first, fully, and only then considers whether disclosure serves a strategic purpose. Silence becomes a filter. Not every thought deserves exposure, and not every move requires witnesses. This restraint is not secrecy for its own sake. It is protection of momentum. When fewer people are involved, fewer people can slow you down. There is also a psychological advantage in withholding explanation. People instinctively respect what they cannot easily read. Excessive transparency invites scrutiny, debate, and challenge. When you act without over-explaining, others are forced to infer competence. Ambiguity creates weight. It signals that you are not seeking consensus, only outcomes. Very few understand how much authority is lost through unnecessary clarity. Machiavelli observed that power is preserved through selective disclosure. Those who reveal everything leave nothing to control. By contrast, those who reveal little command attention without effort. Their actions appear deliberate because they are not diluted by reassurance. They do not rush to fill silence or correct assumptions. They allow space to work in their favor. Living for yourself, then, is not rebellion, it is containment. It is the discipline of holding your direction internally until action makes explanation irrelevant. When results appear, they cannot be argued with. At that point, approval follows naturally, but it no longer matters. Authority has already been established, quietly and without negotiation. Emotional transparency is often praised as honesty, but in reality it is one of the most common forms of strategic self-sabotage. Most people reveal far more than they realize through tone, reactions, confessions, and moral signaling. They believe openness builds trust, yet it more often builds leverage for others. When your emotions are easily visible, your pressure points are clearly mapped. Those who understand power do not need to attack you. They simply wait for the right moment to apply pressure where it already hurts. Machiavelli recognized that visibility creates vulnerability. The more others know about your fears, desires, insecurities, or internal conflicts, the easier it becomes to guide your behavior. Emotional transparency turns private motives into public handles. This is not because people are cruel, but because human nature gravitates toward advantage. Information is advantage. When you volunteer it freely, you surrender control without resistance. The unaware often confuse emotional restraint with coldness. In truth, restraint is discipline. A controlled individual still feels deeply, but those emotions are processed internally, not broadcast externally. They do not allow momentary feelings to dictate public behavior. This separation is critical. Once emotion governs action, predictability follows. Predictability invites manipulation. Those who react quickly are easy to steer. Those who pause force others to adjust. Silence in this context is not absence, it is positioning. When you do not immediately explain yourself, people project their own assumptions. This projection often works in your favor. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty demands respect. The moment you rush to clarify, defend, or emotionally justify, you collapse that uncertainty and place yourself back into a reactive posture. Power shifts away from those who explain too much. Machiavelli warned against unnecessary honesty not because truth lacks value, but because timing defines its usefulness. Truth revealed at the wrong moment weakens the revealer. Strategic minds understand that not every truth needs to be shared, and not every emotion needs to be expressed. Control lies in choosing when disclosure strengthens your position and when it undermines it. Most people disclose to relieve internal tension, not to achieve strategic clarity. That relief is temporary. The consequences are lasting. There is also a deeper psychological effect at play. When others cannot easily read you, they become cautious. They listen more carefully. They observe rather than interrupt. This shifts the dynamic subtly but decisively. You are no longer reacting to the environment. The environment is reacting to you. Emotional opacity creates gravity. It slows interactions, forces recalibration, and restores balance of power. Strength in this framework is not emotional suppression. It is emotional governance. You acknowledge feelings privately, analyze them rationally, and decide deliberately how, if at all, they will be expressed. This is not deception, it is self-mastery. Machiavelli understood that the individual who controls internal exposure controls external outcomes. When you stop leaking emotion, you stop leaking leverage. The world becomes quieter around you, and in that quiet, your position solidifies. Most people live under the illusion that their guilt is evidence of moral strength. In reality, much of what they experience as conscience is nothing more than deeply ingrained conditioning. From an early age, approval is rewarded and deviation is corrected. Over time, this creates an internal alarm system that activates whenever others are disappointed, uncomfortable, or disapproving. Machiavelli understood that this mechanism is one of the most effective tools of control because it operates internally. No external force is required once guilt governs behavior. This form of guilt is subtle. It appears when you choose yourself over expectation, when you decline access, when you prioritize long-term positioning over immediate harmony. The mind reacts with discomfort, not because the choice is wrong, but because it violates conditioning. Most people interpret this discomfort as a moral signal and retreat. In doing so, they reinforce obedience. They learn that compliance brings relief and autonomy brings unease. This cycle keeps them predictable and manageable. The disciplined mind separates ethics from emotional pressure. Ethical behavior is rooted in principles, not in the emotional reactions of others. Social pressure, by contrast, is fluid and self-serving. It shifts depending on who holds influence. When guilt is triggered by disappointment rather than wrongdoing, it becomes a leash. Machiavelli observed that those who cannot tolerate disapproval will never hold power, because power inevitably creates friction. If every objection destabilizes you, your direction will always be compromised. Living for yourself requires the ability to withstand discomfort without immediately resolving it through submission. This is not cruelty or indifference, it is psychological maturity. You learn to sit with tension, to allow others to feel dissatisfied without rushing to correct it. Most people cannot do this. They confuse peace with alignment. In reality, peace achieved through self-erasure is fragile and short-lived. There is a strategic advantage in this restraint. When you do not reflexively respond to guilt, others recalibrate their expectations. They learn that emotional pressure does not produce compliance. Over time, this reshapes the dynamic. You are no longer managed through disappointment or implied obligation. Your boundaries solidify without confrontation. Machiavelli recognized that power often belongs to those who do not need to announce it. It is felt through consistency, not explanation. This distinction between integrity and obedience is critical. Integrity is internal and non-negotiable. Obedience is external and situational. When you confuse the two, you become vulnerable to manipulation disguised as morality. The aware individual acts ethically, but does not sacrifice strategy to soothe the other's emotions. They understand that disappointment is not harm and disapproval is not failure. Strength, in this sense, is the capacity to remain aligned while others react. You do not need to justify every decision or soften every boundary. The moment you stop treating guilt as a command, you reclaim authority over your choices. Machiavelli's insight was clear: those who govern themselves by internal principle rather than external pressure cannot be easily governed by anyone else. Powerful individuals do not react, they respond. This is a subtle distinction that most people fail to grasp. Reactivity is impulsive, emotional, and predictable. It comes from a place of exposure. When external stimuli threaten identity, ego, or comfort, a reflex is triggered. The average person responds to challenges immediately, often over-explaining, defending, or compensating. Machiavelli observed that those who react constantly place themselves at the mercy of the environment, surrendering initiative and allowing others to dictate the pace of interaction. The moment you stop reacting, you regain control over timing, direction, and perception. Silence is one of the most powerful tools in this framework. Those who speak to defend themselves or clarify intentions too quickly reveal priorities and vulnerabilities. They inadvertently create a map of their emotional and strategic weak points. In contrast, the self-controlled individual allows space for interpretation. Others are forced to project motives, assumptions, and expectations onto them. This uncertainty is not discomfort for the unaware, it is leverage for the aware. When people are unsure of your boundaries, intentions, or reactions, they hesitate. Hesitation shifts power. The advantage of non-reactivity is amplified when others attempt manipulation through provocation. Most attempts rely on immediate emotional responses. Anger, defensiveness, or fear signals predictability, offering manipulators a clear path. Machiavelli noted that the most effective rulers did not overexpose their emotions. Instead, they remained composed, measured, and deliberate, letting actions communicate authority. Those who can maintain equanimity under pressure are perceived as unshakable, even if internal conflict exists. This perception alone alters dynamics, often dissuading interference before it begins. Moreover, selective engagement enhances authority. Powerful individuals understand that not every prompt requires a response, and not every interpretation needs correction. People instinctively seek clarity and validation. By withholding it, you invert influence, others adjust to you, not the reverse. Silence forces reflection and creates gravity. Conversations, negotiations, and social exchanges become slower, more deliberate, and weighted. This is subtle dominance. It is quiet, controlled, and psychologically persuasive. Non-reactivity also strengthens self-mastery. Emotional discipline is reinforced through practice, observing impulses, delaying expression, and choosing strategic timing. Every moment of restraint deepens control over perception, allowing actions to be guided by intent rather than compulsion. The aware individual is patient, understanding that timing determines impact. Immediate response rarely maximizes outcomes. Calculated pause ensures influence. Finally, the disciplined individual recognizes that power is cumulative. Each measured pause, each withheld clarification, and each controlled reaction compounds authority. The unaware cannot perceive the pattern immediately, but they feel its weight. Over time, control shifts from external pressures to internal command. The world begins to move around the composed individual rather than the individual moving around the world. Machiavelli's insight remains clear. Dominance is preserved not through confrontation, but through the mastery of one's own reactions. Living for yourself does more than shield you from manipulation. It sharpens perception to levels most people cannot reach. Those who constantly seek approval are blind to subtle dynamics. They notice only what affects their comfort, not what signals true power shifts. Machiavelli recognized that awareness separates the few who lead from the masses who follow. By detaching from the need to please, the mind becomes a finely tuned instrument, capable of detecting who benefits from hesitation, who grows unsettled when expectations are unmet, and who is attempting to exploit predictability. This awareness is not casual observation, it is strategic surveillance of human behavior. When you stop aligning with others' agendas, you begin to notice patterns that were previously invisible. Relationships, alliances, and social hierarchies reveal their true nature. The people who seem loyal often have motives that serve their convenience. Those who appear indifferent may hold unexpected influence. By living for yourself, you are no longer distracted by the pursuit of validation, and your attention becomes a weapon. Every interaction is analyzed not emotionally, but tactically. You understand that influence is rarely explicit. It is subtle, operating in pauses, silences, and unspoken expectations. The aware individual reads these currents while the unaware swims blindly. This level of awareness also provides clarity in confrontation. Most people react instinctively to challenges, believing they must defend, justify, or persuade immediately. The self-directed individual recognizes that the first impulse is often the least strategic. Instead, they observe, absorbing information while maintaining internal composure. They watch how tension shifts, who attempts to manipulate, and who benefits from confusion. Machiavelli understood that the moment you detach from pleasing, you acquire a vantage point. You can see motives and weaknesses without revealing your own, and this detachment grants the upper hand in virtually every social exchange. Living for yourself also cultivates an internal radar for exploitation. The unaware are easily steered by suggestion, subtle coercion, or implied obligation. They make decisions based on imagined expectations rather than reality. In contrast, the self-directed individual measures every request against long-term strategy. They are slow to react, not from hesitation, but from deliberate evaluation. Each decision is weighed in terms of personal alignment, leverage, and consequence. This is not cynicism, it is disciplined awareness. Machiavelli stressed that those who are constantly reactive surrender initiative. The aware individual prevents this by filtering external influence through internal authority. Furthermore, detachment enhances discernment in forming alliances. When you live for others, relationships are transactional and heavily influenced by fear of loss or desire for approval. This creates dependency and misalignment. The self-directed person, however, sees potential collaborators clearly, who aligns strategically, who adds value, and who introduces unnecessary risk. They do not cling to approval or affection, they assess reality. This clarity prevents wasted energy, emotional compromise, and suboptimal positioning. Every alliance is intentional, not convenient, and this intentionality signals power without force. Another layer of this awareness is the perception of social energy. When you stop performing for others, subtle changes in behavior and intention become apparent. Who grows anxious when you assert independence? Who attempts to regain influence through flattery or pressure? Who is genuinely aligned, indifferent, or opposed? The self-directed mind catalogues these patterns, using them to anticipate behavior and prepare responses. Each observation reinforces control. Machiavelli highlighted that true power comes from knowledge of human tendencies, and detachment reveals that knowledge effortlessly. Finally, living for yourself transforms timing into an ally. Once you are no longer reacting to expectation, you see opportunities that others overlook. You move when conditions are optimal, speak when influence is maximized, and withhold action until impact is unavoidable. Awareness becomes proactive rather than reactive. Silence, observation, and patience converge into a strategic posture that is difficult to counter. By detaching from approval, you stop being a player on someone else's board. You create your own board, see all pieces, and dictate the pace. The world shifts subtly around the self-directed individual, and in that space, influence becomes inevitable, precise, and enduring. The ultimate expression of power is self-mastery, and it is far more rare than most imagine. Very few understand that dominance is not about exerting force over others, it is about exerting force over oneself. Machiavelli recognized that the person who cannot govern their own impulses, timing, and emotions cannot govern influence outside themselves. Those who live for approval, who allow fear or desire to dictate actions, are perpetually at the mercy of circumstance. True authority begins internally. Every decision, reaction, and disclosure is calculated not to impress, but to preserve and enhance strategic position. Self-mastery starts with understanding that every visible action carries weight, and weight is amplified when it is deliberate. The self-directed individual moves quietly but with intent. Words are chosen, gestures are minimal, and timing is precise. This is the opposite of performative power, which seeks validation and attention. Machiavelli observed that influence is often perceived through restraint rather than exhibition. The quieter you are, the more your actions resonate. Those who speak constantly to assert dominance often reveal gaps in control, while those who speak selectively establish authority that is unquestioned and lasting. Another critical component of self-mastery is emotional governance. The average person is easily destabilized by anger, criticism, or unexpected pressure. They overact, providing leverage to those who would manipulate them. The self-directed individual experiences the same stimuli but responds according to internal rules rather than reflex. Emotional control is not repression, it is tactical regulation. Anger is acknowledged privately, fear is analyzed objectively, and desire is assessed for strategic value. This creates a presence that is difficult to predict, even harder to exploit, and quietly commanding. Timing and patience are also essential elements of dominance. Those who live for others rush to appease, explain, or react. They are victims of external pacing, constantly trying to close gaps they themselves did not create. The self-directed individual moves when conditions are favorable, knowing that influence is maximized when decisions are aligned with both opportunity and intent. Silence, delay, and observation are not weaknesses, they are tools for accumulation of leverage. Machiavelli repeatedly emphasized that power is preserved through preparation and anticipation, not through constant motion. Self-mastery also allows for controlled revelation. Most people overshare intentions, motives, and vulnerabilities, believing transparency builds trust. The self-directed individual reveals selectively only when disclosure enhances position or creates strategic advantage. By controlling access to information, they create ambiguity that is unsettling to others and advantageous to themselves. Interpretation shifts. When people cannot predict your next move, they defer, hesitate, and respect the unseen boundaries you maintain. This subtle dominance is far more effective than confrontation, coercion, or force. The cultivation of inner authority also reshapes relationships. Alliances are no longer based on expectation or obligation, they are based on strategic alignment. When others understand that your priorities are fixed, that your direction is independent, and that compliance cannot be purchased through manipulation or pressure, interactions become calculated and meaningful. The self-directed individual navigates social networks like a master player, extracting influence without compromising autonomy. Finally, self-mastery transforms presence into power. When your actions are deliberate, your words measured, and your intentions opaque, your weight increases. You become someone who cannot be rushed, pressured, or owned. Influence radiates from composure, patience, and calculated action rather than noise, emotion, or concession. Machiavelli's ultimate lesson is clear. Dominance is not acquired through brute force or charisma alone. It is cultivated internally through restraint, strategic patience, and unwavering commitment to one's own principles. Those who master themselves cannot be easily undermined. They move with a quiet authority that commands respect, shapes outcomes, and defines the terms of engagement in every arena they enter. If this sharpened your awareness, subscribe and stay aligned with control over noise. Remember, the world rewards those who manage perception but only respects those who manage themselves. Pause here and ask who has been steering your decisions.